Hi students, welcome to the BYJU'S Hindu News Analysis for 6th of October 2018. So let's get started. So let's look into the number of topics that we will be discussing for the day. So the first article would be India Russia sign S-400 missile deal after summit. Then we will have one of the important Nobel Peace Prize discussion, and then we will be discussing about the Musi River and the concerns that have been voiced in this particular article, and then we will be discussing about the myths and realities about the VVPAT machine, and then we will have an editorial discussion about avoiding the currency basket case, and then we will have a discussion with respect to Anna Polsky award, and then we will look into the prelims based questions as well as the mains based questions. So let's get started and look into the first article. So the first article says India Russia sign S-400 missile deal after the summit. So the first point that we will be discussing is about the S-400. So what we will be discussing in this session is what is the importance of the S-400, why did India go about with this particular acceptance of this deal, what are the various other agreements that India signed up with Russia, and what is the way forward is what we will be discussing with respect to India and Russian relationship in reference to S-400. So let's look into all that is important in terms of the prelims as well as the mains fact. First important point that we need to understand is what is the S-400. So when we look into what this S-400 is, the S-400 is a air defense missile system which can track and shoot down about 80 simultaneous targets, including the cruise, ballistic missiles, aircraft, UAVs as well as the ground based targets. So what is the most unique aspect of this S-400 in comparison to any other anti-ballistic missiles is it would be able to take down any of the incoming missiles simultaneously. So it would be able to fire 80 simultaneous targets instantaneously and within a deployment time of about 10 minutes. So the most important and the USP of S-400 time long range air defense system is it is a surface to air missile. So what do we mean by it? So let's say for example there is one of the air system that is flying in from the neighboring country. Let's say for example Pakistan has always been a threat to us. So let's say there is one of the air missiles that is flying up from Pakistan. So what this will do is from the surface it would be able to detect that there is one of the missile systems coming from the neighboring country, and now this is a threat, and now what it will do is it will be able to neutralize this particular system. So this S-400 system, which is also known as the Russia's most advanced long range surface to air missile system, is capable of destroying all the hostile strategic bombers, and what this will have is the three important components. So what are the three important components that we are speaking about? So the three important components in this case is one, we have is the command control system. So we would be able to control the trajectory of the air defense, that is we would be able to project a particular missile in an intended direction. So we have a command control system, and this command control system would be able to send the anti-defense missile and hit the target in a particular direction, and this control of anti-defense missile system is happening through the command control system. And then what we have is a powerful radar unit. So what is the importance of this radar unit? Basically when we say the radar unit, what will happen is the radar in this particular case would be able to track an incoming missile about 600 kilometers away from it. So what do we mean by it? Let's say for example the S-400s that are deployed in India can track aircraft that are flying well outside the country's barriers. Let's say for example we know that there is a boundary here, that is let's say there is India and Pakistan boundary here. So this radar would be able to detect the missile even if it is flying from Pakistan, that is it has a range of detection up to 600 kilometers. It would not be able to neutralize at 600 kilometers, but it would be able to detect this particular missile in case it is coming from the neighboring countries. So the detection range of this S-400 is about 600 kilometers. So it would be able to track any aircrafts which is flying well outside the country's borders, and that is a major act of deterrent for the India. So what is the most important point that we also need to understand is its range is about 380 to 400 kilometers. So we realize that the radar would be able to detect any missile in the range of 600 kilometers, but when it approaches about 400 and anything less than that, the missile system through the command system would be able to fire that missile and we would be able to neutralize this system. So that's the advantage with respect to the S-400. So this fourth generation system in terms of its combat capabilities is useful to India, and that is why India has accepted this particular proposal. So what we need to understand in here is it is not only India which has taken this S-400. China in the year it is 2014 has already accepted this S-400, and India is becoming a second player to buy this S-400. So in case there is a prelims question that is likely to be asked that India is the first country that has accepted S-400, not. It is China which has accepted S-400 in the year 2014, and India becomes the second customer after China to take up this S-400. So this is what the S-400 all about. So what we will have to understand in the present context is that this delivery of the S-400 system will begin in the next 24 months and within the end of the year 2020. So what they are planning to do is they are planning to deliver one of the S-400s. They'll said that they'll be working on it and they'll be delivering this system by the year 2020. And as per the procedure, the source also said that India would be paying almost 15% in advance so that they'll be able to start off with the process and they'll be able to deliver the goods by the year 2020. So this is the major important point from the prelims perspective. The second important point that we will have to understand is why is that India went about with S-400. One of the major reasons as to why India went about this particular process is because of the security threat from the neighboring countries. We know for the fact that Pakistan is a neighboring country and it has a nuclear presence. We also know for the fact there is another neighboring country, China, which is much advanced in terms of the military prowess. So both these countries have fought n number of wars with India, and because we have already fought n number of wars with India, that is China and Pakistan have fought number of wars with India, that is the prime reason as to why India wanted S-400 immediately. So let's look at some of the factual data. So Pakistan nearly has about 20 fighter squadrons with upgraded F-16s as well as inducting J-17 from China in large numbers, as well as when we look into the Chinese component, they already have 1700 fighters. This also includes 800 fourth generation fighters. So this is a major threat for India. So in case there is a war, thankfully there is no war, but in case there is a war, what would happen in this particular cases? India already has a less squadron state, that is the Indian Air Force has a less number of aircrafts, so it would not be able to take on a two-fledged war. So in case a war breaks out, there is attack from Pakistan, there is attack from China. In this case, what we would not be able to take on is both these countries simultaneously. Why? Because India does not have the strength in this particular case. What is the strength that we are speaking about? The strength is in terms of the aircrafts. So because India does not have the required aircraft, what this S-400 will actually do is it can act as a deterrent. So this will actually act as a booster shot in the Indian Air Force. So because we do not have the relevant aircraft, that's why we went about with the Rafale deal, because India does not have the required number of aircrafts. Once we have the Rafale deal accomplished, once we have the aircrafts in the Indian Air Force, maybe that will also act as a deterrent. But as of now, India just has around 43 squadrons which we would not be able to take on in case we have a two-fledged war, one on the Pakistan side, one from the Chinese side. So the what S-400 is doing in this case is it is acting as a deterrent so that other countries know that we have S-400, we would be able to neutralize their ballistic missiles. So that becomes one of the major and the important stance that India has taken. And also what we need to understand is that no country would want to face a grave threat, that is India is confronted by our neighbors. So India is always confronted by our enemy neighbors, and then this can be an adversary overnight. So in order to match all their force levels with our adversaries, that is why India has taken up this particular step, so that they'll be able to neutralize any threat that is emanating from Pakistan as well as from China. Another important idea that we will have to understand is about the third. So what is the third all about? So in this particular case, what we will understand is we will understand in reference to the third. So third is one of those important air defense missile system that USA was offering India. So in this particular case, USA was always reluctant, and it was saying India that you were not supposed to sign this particular treaty and you were not supposed to get this S-400 with Russia. And what USA also did was USA was always saying that it was ready to offer its high terminal altitude air defense system rather than the Russian S-400. So this American anti-ballistic missile system is a shoot down short, medium as well as intermediate range ballistic missiles, and what this has is a hit to kill technology, and this hit to kill technology will make use of the kinetic energy. So because of the infused timing of the kinetic energy and because of its added advantage of hit to kill technology, what USA was offering to India was thought in replacement for S-400. But what we will have to understand is India had a good relationship, India also had a cordial relationship with USA, but why did India go with S-400 rather than the THAAD is the question that pops up. So for this, what we will have to understand is certain understanding with respect to the diplomatic engagements between India and Russia and India and USA, at the same time the advantages of S-400 over THAAD. So what we need to understand in this case is that the range of THAAD is about 200 kilometers. So it would be able to fire across a particular missile within a range of about 200 kilometers. But we did discuss that S-400 had a range of about 400 kilometers. So this is an added advantage for India. So in case the radars are able to detect the missile at about 400 kilometers, they would be able to neutralize it. But in case of that, it is just 200 kilometers. So there is an added advantage. So apart from this, we did also discuss it would be able to engage 80 targets simultaneously. This is the USP of S-400. So when we are looking from the mechanism of the missile advantages, the two major advantages of S-400 over the THAAD, one is to do with the range, the other one is engaging targets simultaneously, and that is the 80 targets can be involved simultaneously. So these are the important advantages of S-400 over THAAD. However, India also had other important things. One was in terms of the diplomatic engagements, the other was in terms of the historical value. So what we need to understand in this particular case is when we look into the diplomatic engagements, what we will understand is India has proved and understood that there can be a reliable friendship with Russia. Let's go back to the Indian Independence Day. So from the Indian Independence Day till now, India has always believed that Russia is our close partner. It is Russia's military that serves India's backyard. It is Russia's military items that is always help us understand the military recognition. So what we have to understand here is this has been a major add-on for India to accept Russia, where Russia has stood with us in the tested times. So what is the major thing? Because Russia is able to stand with us from Independence Day till date, from the day of independence till date, and all the Indian military equipments has been one of the important things that has been launched from Russia. That is the major reason as to why India also went up with S-400. And other important point that we have to understand is when we look into THAAD, right? So this THAAD is currently used or are put up in countries like South Korea as well as Saudi Arabia. What we have to understand in this case is whenever US is providing certain equipment or any defense mechanism to any other country, it does not believe in transfer of technology. So that's the major impediment for India. And apart from this, whenever it is giving any of the equipments to the host country, it is followed up by certain stringent rules, and these rules are very tough to comply by. So because USA always believe in these stringent rules, this was not going good with India. That is why it went about with the S-400. And also also what we need to understand in this case is that India also is planning to take up a number of assault rifles, the assault rifles including the AK-103. So these assault rifles, which are like the AK-103, are in discussion. As of now, they are not into implementation bit, but there are certain rifles where Russia has also said that it is planning to provide the transfer of technology. So because India is also getting transfer of technology with respect to the other rifles, that is why India had to take up this particular move. And also the most important point is there has been certain deviation with respect to India and Russian relationship, and in order to make sure that this particular act is rebridged, in order to make sure that there is a balancing act, and in order to establish the macro stability in the India and Russian relationship, this was the ideal way to establish the credibility. And that is why India went about with the S-400 rather than with the USS THAAD. So what we will have to understand in the next point is that USA has always been saying that we will put sanctions on India, but what we will have to understand in this case is that USA will also think on two fronts. So what are the two fronts that we are speaking about? Initially, when India's and US's defense started exploring and it started expanding and it started get wings to its aspirations, what was happening was India's share of USA's defense equipment was about 2% initially when it started the diplomatic as well as the military engagement. But with time, currently what we have is about 15% of the military engagement. This can be in terms of the recent moves that India has taken in terms of all the military equipments exports from USA to India. So what has happened with time is from 2% India has taken it up to 15%. But what USA will right now think is, in case USA actually goes about sanctioning these things, that India will have problems, and when India has problems, this can jeopardize the relationship with USA. So what USA will also think is, it will be very careful rather than approaching it in terms of the sanctions. What it will basically go on to do is, it will understand the importance of these S-400 to India, and then it may kind of ignore. But as of now, this is just a speculation that we are making. Why? Because in case India actually goes about blocking this, then it can jeopardize the relationship. And at the same time, what we also need to understand is that India has partnered with United States of America in the Indo-Pacific region, and India is also one of the most important parameters in the stability of South Asian regions. So in order to bring stability in the Indo-Pacific region as well as in the South Asian region, what we need is certain deterrence, and this deterrence is provided by S-400. And India and United States have always had been in talks in order to bring about credibility in this area. So in order to bring peace and tranquility in India, India needs S-400, and so USA in this case would be able to take upon this India's watch, and it will not jeopardize this relationship with India, is what we need to understand. Need to understand is that there were other areas of cooperation. So what are the other areas of cooperation? India and Russia inked 8 deals in a variety of sectors, including railways, fertilizers and space. And one of the most important is there was the MOU between ISRO as well as Russian Space Agency in the field of human space life. So what we have to understand is, it was in the year 1984 that Rakesh Sharma was the first Indian who was acting as a cosmonaut in a human space flight program on a Russian machine. And now what is the advantage? It is the same Russia which is helping us advance our goals of Gaganyaan, and what it has said is that we will have a mutual cooperation and understanding in reference to the human space flight program. So what happened in 1984 was an Indian acting as a cosmonaut on a Russian mission, and what we will see now is an Indian mission having Indians, and this is the program of Gaganyaan. And apart from this, we will have better cooperation among the protocol for consultations between the Ministry of Foreign Affairs Russia and the MIA between 2019 and 2023, and then there will be a MOU between the Ministry of Economic Development and Niti Aayog. Fertilizers sector, Indian Potash Limited has agreed to import about 2 million tons of fertilizers worth 7,300 crores from Asia's post-ground. And then there is a MOU between the National Small Industries Corporation Corporation India Limited and the Russian Small Medium Business Corporation. So all this is acting as an important thing, and apart from this, action plan for prioritization and implementation of cooperation, this is in the form of two fronts. One is in the form of energy, that is discussion in terms of India, that is in the form of Kundankulam, and then what we are also cooperating is in Bangladesh. So Bangladesh is planning to come up with the nuclear program, that is the civil nuclear program, so where India and Russia are cooperating amongst themselves in order to provide nuclear support to Bangladesh to bring up its energy paradigm. So this is what we need to understand from this article. So moving on, let's look into the next article. So the next article says Congolese doctor Yazidi activist get Nobel Peace Prize. So the Nobel Peace Prize here has been given to Denis Mukwege, who is from Congo, as well as Nadia Murad, who is an UN Goodwill Ambassador. So who are these two people? One, he is a gynecologist who founded the hospital that helps survivors of sexual violence in Democratic Republic of Congo. So kindly remember this fact. He is from Democratic Republic of Congo. He is the first Congolese to win the award. These are some of the factual data that is important from the prelims perspective. So kindly remember all these important facts. And then what we are seeing is with respect to Nadia Murad, and she is a member of Yazidi minority in the northern Iraq. She was held as a sex slave by the Islamic State. So she is the first Iraqi awardee of the Peace Prize. So Dr. Mukwege and the staff treated thousands of sexual violence victims. He is also known as Dr. Miracle for his ability to repair the damage inflicted on women due to rape. And also when we are speaking about Murad has openly and courageously spoken about the suffering of the hands of the IS, and in 2016 she was named as the UN's first Goodwill Ambassador for dignity of survivors of human trafficking. So what is important in this case? That we understand that both these two people, that is Denis Mukwege as well as Nadia Murad, were standing for the women rights. So they felt all the pain that a woman could go through. In the pain, in the grief, they were laying their hands and they were giving their support to these people and defending the victims of wartime sexual violence. And what is the most important point is that they actually looked into their own sufferings and started speaking on the behalf of other citizens. This is what we need to understand from this article. So moving on, let's look into the next article. So the next article says a river that needs a helping hand. So what is the river that we are speaking about? So we are speaking about the Musi River. So first let us try to understand some of the factual data that can pop up from the prelims examination. So the Musi River gets its name from two important streams, and that is Musa as well as Isi. So these two rivers that come up together and join, and that is when we will have the river Musi, and this converges at the Tipu Khan Bridge in the Golconda area. So this Musi Niru is a tributary of Krishna River in the Deccan Plateau flowing through the region of Telangana. So what are the two important points? Once again, this is a tributary of Krishna River. So this particular question has also been asked in the previous prelims examination. That is why we are discussing this article. And also this flows in the region on the state of Telangana. So the river originates in Anantagiri Hills near Vikratabad in Vikratabad district. It joins the Krishna River at Vadapalli in the Nalgonda district. And Hyderabad stands on the banks of Musi River, which divides the historic old city as well as the new city. So this Himayat Sagar as well as Osman Sagar are dams which are built on it, which used to act as a source of water for the people of Hyderabad. The river was known as Nava during the Qutub Shahi period. So what we are understanding in this case is what are the various concerns that have been voiced in this article. So what we need to understand is when we look into the year 1900s, this was one of the most beautiful rivers in this area of Telangana, especially in the region of Hyderabad. So this river, which was glowing and flowing in a large spaces, was one of the ideal spots, and this was used for irrigation, this was used for drinking water purposes, and this was also used for producing agricultural commodities. But there are certain concerns that are voiced. So what are these concerns? The major concerns that are voiced with respect to this particular article is that there is a large scale pollution of this river. So what is happening in this case is, except for few months during the monsoon season, most of the time this river is completely dry. Except for the monsoon season where it flows, this particular river most of the times is completely dry, and because this river does not flow, this is a major cause of concern. Why? We are not able to provide the irrigation, we are not able to provide the drinking water facility, and all the agricultural crops that were once being grown in this area are now not being able to be grown, and that's the major problem. And the next most important point that we have to understand is there is large scale pollution that is happening in this particular river. That is, they see a large scale plastic packets that have been thrown in here, and then there are certain puja offerings which are just dumped into this river. Let's say for example, you have the coconuts, you have the mango leaves, you have certain flowers which are just thrown into rivers, and this is used in the form of edible water earlier, but now the problem is we are not able to use it as the drinking water purposes. And apart from this, what we also see is carcasses of pigs as well as dogs in this case, this leading to further harmful problems with respect to this particular river. And apart from this, what we need to realize is that Hyderabad is growing large scale and there is indiscriminate urbanization that is happening. So because there is large scale urbanization, and due to lack of planning in this particular case, this has become a major problem. Why has it become a major problem? That is because there is untreated waste as well as industrial disposition that is being pushed across this particular river. Because there is indiscriminate urbanization and because lack of planning, what is happening in this case is untreated domestic as well as industrial wastewater within the city limits are being dumped into this river. And the most important point we have to understand is because of this chemical disposition of things that is happening to Musi river, there is certain chemical waste which is being pushed into this water, and because there is chemical waste that actually merges with the groundwater, this can be a potential health hazard. What is the major problem right now? Because all the waste, that is the industrial waste, is coming up to this Musi river, and this chemical waste is getting into the groundwater and it is contaminating the groundwater, and this contamination of groundwater when consumed by the people in the form of drinking water, this can adversely affect the health of the people. So this can be a resulting in a number of major problems. Let's say for example, the high incidence of diseases like the arthritis or diarrhea or skin allergies or stomach problem, malaria, because there is grooming of mosquitoes in this area, and also what we see is certain food poisoning as well as eye diseases. So these are the major concerns that have been voiced because of the Musi river. Also what we need to understand is there is construction of rubber dam. So first let's try to understand some of the factual data that this article goes about speaking, and then understand how does this rubber dam basically work. So what we need to understand is there was one of the construction of rubber dams near the High Court building. So there is a High Court in Hyderabad and there was a construction of rubber dam basically to help Musi river in order to maintain and conserve this Musi river. But what has happened with respect to this is that this has resulted in a creation of pollution to a larger extent. Let's try and understand first as to how this rubber dam works, and let's try and understand the advantages as well as the disadvantages. So what we need to understand is this rubber dam is also called as the flexible check dam. So what happens in this case is, let's say for example, there is the rubber dam construction here, and what we will have in this particular case is the control room. So you will have the control room on either sides of this dam, and this is the construction of the dam that has taken in this particular case. So what would happen is you have the rubber which is inflated or deflated. So what do we mean by it? So you have a particular path where the rubber dam is constructed, and when we have to conserve the water, or let's say for example we will have to flood control it, or we will have to regulate the water, then the water in this particular case can be controlled by inflating. So you have the rubber in this particular case, so the gas is inflated into this rubber dam, and what is the resultant is this will act as like a wall. So the water in this particular area will be conserved and it is not allowed to flow to this area. Now let's say for example this will almost take about 3 hours for inflation, that is putting in of gas into this rubber area, and this particular act can actually conserve the water. But let's say for example there has to be a genuine flow of water. So what do we mean by it? That is, in this case what we go about doing is the deflation. So whatever air is present within that rubber tube will be completely deflated, that is, the air will be removed out, and the minute the air is removed out, what will happen in this case is the wall that was constructed immediately flattens up, and then what we have is the movement of water across this particular region. So the head or the height of the rubber dam can be varied, and this can be varied with the help of the control unit. So we did discuss that there is a control unit on both the sides of the dam, and with the help of the control unit we would be able to inflate as well as deflate and control the flow of water in this particular case. But what is the major problem is that this construction of the rubber dam in the high court premises has leading to what is called as water stagnation, and because there is a large scale water stagnation in this area, what is the resultant? The resultant is the breeding of the mosquitoes. So because there is large scale breeding of mosquitoes in this particular case, this can further lead to what is called as health hazards, and this can also be problem to the people, is what this discussed in this article. So this is what we need to understand from this article. So moving on, let's look into the next article. So the next article says VVPAT myths and realities. So what we will have to initially understand is just we will understand the basics, because we have already put up a video on YouTube with respect to the EVMs. Kindly look into it, but what we will be discussing is basics that have been voiced with respect to this concern. So what is a VVPAT, or the voter verifiable paper audit trail? So this particular machine basically allows voter to verify that if the vote that he wanted to vote, is it for the right candidate or is it for a wrong candidate. So basically what the VVPAT will basically go on to do is it will print the voter's franchise on a thermal paper ballot, and this thermal paper ballot we would be able to see it through a particular window for about 7 seconds. So this is an important point from the prelims perspective. So we would be able to see if that person that we have voted for is genuine or not, and this is visible through that window for about 7 seconds. So basically what we are checking is the authenticity as well as vote if it is gone for the intended candidate or not. So this printed ballot is then pushed into a particular compartment called as the ballot slip compartment. So what are the myths and realities that it speaks about? So what it goes on to say is that VVPAT slips are collected by the voter. This is incorrect, but the reality is VVPAT slips cannot be touched by the voter. However, they are visible to the voter for 7 seconds behind a transparent screen, at the end of which it will fall into a sealed compartment into the VVPAT, and then VVPAT will not last more than 50 to 30 years is the myth that it says. And then this is the correct one is the print on the thermal paper is used lasts for more than 5 years. And then what is the myth? The VVPAT takes photo of the voter, thereby compromising secrecy of votes. This is incorrect, but the reality is VVPAT has no camera and it can't take any photograph of the voter. Why are we discussing this? Because this can be likely asked in the prelims questions, and then there are chances that we may miss on it. What we also need to understand in this particular case is whenever this VVPAT is shown on a particular screen, there are three things that this particular VVPAT basically goes on to show. One is we have the candidate's name, and then what we have is the party symbol, and then thirdly what we have is the candidate number. So all these things are also there on the EVM machine, and this is further proved and audited by this VVPAT machine. So this is what we need to understand from this article. So moving on, let's look into the next article. So the next article says avoiding the currency basket. So what is this article? So basically what this article goes on to speak about is how is that India's tool as a currency, India's market currency value was used earlier. This acts as a background, and once we understand how this was used in the international market, what we will try to understand is why is that India's currency is decreasing, that is it is depreciating every now and then. So what are the possible solutions that we have to come across, and what are the ways that black money is a major cause of hindrance, and how is that we have to work about it. And then last, what we will see is how is that China is able to infuse its currency into the global market, and how India needs to make the rupee as a international currency is what we will be understanding with respect to this article. So once we look into the background, what we will see is that India's currency earlier was used in number of countries. Let's say for example, it was used in Borneo, it was used in Macau, it was used in Muscat, Basra as well as Zanzibar. So historically, when we see how India's currency was also used by other countries, this was also a resultant of India's trade relationship with other countries. So India had a large scale trade relationship, and because India had a large scale trade relationship, India was using its own currency for trading with other countries. This was also used in number of Gulf countries, and this also resulted in Warman calling it as the Gulf rupee till 1970. So India was using this currency in order to trade with other currencies, that is the rupee was used to directly trade with other currencies. But what we see was there is a decrease in the currency value. Why is this revaluation happening? For which we will have to understand the history. So when we look into certain statistics, right, in 1947 the rupee dollar rate was about 3.30, that is $1 was about 3 rupees 30 paisa. The aforementioned devaluation which happened in the year 1965 and 1966, it resulted in about 7.50, and finally it reached about 32.5 by 1995. So why was this depreciation happening? So it was in the year 1947, what we see was the currency was actually flaking at around 3.30. But what is the major cause of concern here? So the major cause of concern or the instability that was resulted is due to a number of factors. So these number of factors was in terms of the war that we had, the war in terms of Chinese and Pakistan. So this was a period where India fought a lot of wars. One was in the year 1962 with China, and then we had a war with Pakistan in 1965. Then there was Bangladesh crisis in 1971. So again India had, so there was large scale war that India fought in the year 1970s and 1960s. This is a major problem, and that is why there was decline with respect to India and depreciation of rupees. And what we also see is that India started acquiring a lot of foreign loans, and when India started acquiring foreign loans, those people, let's say for example IMF or any international organization, will have certain rules, and in order to understand and mend to their rules, India again had to depreciate. And apart from this, there was a lot of political instability in India. Let's say for example in the year 1970s, there was emergency that was declared. There was a lot of political instability in India. The political aspirations for number of political parties were too much. As a result, there was one political party trying to replace one over the other. So the political instability was large during this period, leading to what is also called as the oil price shock in the year 1973. So all these problems were the major problem as to why the currency started depreciating, and then all those countries which were once using the Indian currency stopped using the Indian currency. So currently what we have is only two countries, that is Nepal as well as Bhutan, which regularly conduct bilateral trade with India in rupees. So other countries which were once using the Indian rupee are no more using this Indian rupee. And currently these are the historical factors. But why is it happening right now? What is the depreciation that is happening right now? This is due to the global turmoil. Let's say we did discuss about the Turkey crisis. Somewhere because of the globalization, an impact on one country will have repercussions on the other country. So there are number of things. Let's say for example the US-China trade war, the Iran sanctions on oil price increase, and Turkey crisis and Argentina crisis. Because we are living in a globalized world, any problem that strikes its country will have a major problem on other country. Another important point we also consider is the FII, that is the foreign investment, is actually having a lot of outflows with respect to its stocks as well as bond markets. These are the major problems as to why Indian currency are depreciating currently. So we saw the historical factors, we saw the current factors. So what is the solution? How is that India needs to work upon? So what India needs to do is India has to look on the number of fronts. So what India has to currently do is India has to basically work on its important parameters, that is the RBI has to intervene in the forest market. And then what India is also planning to do is India is planning to come up with non-resident Indian bonds. So what are these NRI bonds? So when we look into these NRI bonds, these are issued to the NRIs, that is not the Indians but the people who are living in other countries. Let's say for example the bonds are released. So what will happen is they'll have a high interest rate. Because they have a very high interest rate, what will happen in this case is that these NRIs, let's say for example they are located in United States of America, they'll want to buy this bond. So what will happen is there is inflow of dollar to India, and then the bonds will go up to the NRIs. Why are they picking it up? The simple reason is there is high interest rate that India provides, that is the RBI provides for all these NRI bonds. So basically this was also done in the year 2013. So in the year 2013 rupee witnessed a large scale fall, and this was the fall of about 25%. So this is one of the time tested tools, and India also tried this tool in the year 1998 as well as in the year 2000. So because it has worked for India, India can actually come up with this NRI bonds. And apart from this, what are we doing in this case? We are releasing the sovereign bond insurance. And the most important point from the international front is India should stop depending too much on US currency. Instead, it should be transacting with other countries in the local currency. Let's say for example, in case we are transacting with Iran for the oil imports, we will have to pay it in terms of rupee. And in case India is paying it to Russia in terms of the military equipments, again it has to follow the rupee payment mechanism. What we are doing in this case is we are having a direct link with respect to the currency, Indian currency, and we are not relying entirely on the international currency, that is the dollar. And also what important things that we'll have to do in this case is we will have to guard against the fiscal profligacy. So what do we mean by fiscal profligacy here? This is the time of elections. So what will happen during elections is, in order to convince its voters and in order to make sure that its vote bank is intact, all the government starts spending more than the capability. Though the tax revenues are comparatively less, what will happen in this case is the government starts spending more and more. Why? Because it wants to retain its voter base. Recently we saw the petrol prices were actually reduced. We also saw that MSP was given to the farmers. So what the government basically believes is, in case it is spending more and more, giving more and more freebies to the people, then it will be able to keep its intact vote bank. So in this case, what the government should also do is, in order to make sure that the fiscal profligacy is not taking place. Why? Because this can also be a cause of concern when it comes to depreciation of the currency. So this also needs to be taken into picture. And the most important point is that India needs to formalize its economy. And what is that we are speaking about? This is in terms of the black money. So what should India do? So India, when it looks into the black money, this is a major cause of deterrent for India. So in order to curb this menace of black money, what we need to do is we need to rationalize certain things, and India has 4 pillars in order to make sure that it is rationalizing certain things. So what are the 4 important parameters that the things we are discussing about? One is in terms of the tax rate rationalization. So what do we mean by tax rate rationalization? Let's say for example, India currency has certain slabs right now. So when we consider the tax rates, what we have in this particular case is, let's say for example, we have a 5% tax bracket, we have 10% tax bracket, we have 30% tax bracket. So what this article goes on to suggest is, we need to have a rational tax rate. So in case we have a progressive system, or in case the tax rate is comparatively reduced, what we will have is the increase in the tax rate and then increase in the tax compliance. Why? Because the rates is not comparatively larger, and because it is within the scale, and because within the scale every person will comply by it. So the first arguments that it puts across is, we need to have a rational tax rationalization. And apart from this, we need to come up with certain reform vulnerable sectors. So what are the vulnerable sectors that we are speaking about? There is large scale informal economy that is brewing in the society. And apart from this, there is certain economies, let's say for example there is Mauritius, and then let's say for example the Panama. All these countries are the nations which actually house the black money. So what we need to do is we need to understand that we need to enter into an administrative agreement where we will sign certain agreements with these countries, let's say for example with Mauritius or with example with the Panama, so that there is mutual tax sharing that we would be able to encourage. And then what we will also see is we need to create a remittance database which is detailing about the transfers that have been taking place with respect to both the countries. So what do we have the idea about? So we will have an idea about the remittances that is taking place, and also because we have an agreement with these two countries, what we will see is better understanding and avoidance of the taxation. And the third important point that we need to understand is the credible deterrence. So what do we mean by credible deterrence? So in this credible deterrence, what we are basically going on doing is we are providing certain training. So what we are doing in this particular case is we are providing all types of training to the people, that is the IT personnel, the direct tax administrators. So these IT administrators should be provided certain IT training, they should be provided certain infrastructure, they should be provided certain IT tools, so they'll be able to detect who is evading the taxes, and then they would be able to get these people into the tax bracket. And at the same time, what we also need to do is we need to have an audit mechanism, and then we need to make sure that the income tax, the service tax, as well as the excise tax all come under this audit mechanism. And then what we will be indirectly doing is we will be engaging in simultaneous scrutiny as well as examination. So all these parameters we should be able to take it up. And then what we need to promote is the cashless economy. And when we are promoting the cashless economy, what we are able to do is we are able to curb the black money, which is also a major cause of depreciation. So in order to address all these issues, and in order to make sure that India has one of those things where it is able to strike at the international level, what we need to do is we need to do internationalization of the currency. So what do we mean by internationalization of the currency? Let's take for example China in this particular case. So the Chinese yuan in this particular case increasingly position itself as an alternative to the reserve currency. Let's say for example you have the dollar, you have the Japan currency, you have the UK pound, and then you have the number of other currencies which has international importance. But what Chinese did basically was it positioned itself as an alternative to the dollar, it positioned itself as an alternative to the pound, it positioned itself as an alternative to the euro. So basically what it did was it started promoting its currency in the international market. How did it do it? It basically went about with different set of institutional mechanisms. It came up with the One Belt and the One Road initiative, it came up with the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank, and it started swapping its currency in the international market. And also what China did was it campaigned for the inclusion of its currency in the IMF benchmark currency basket in 2015, introducing a range of reforms to ensure that yuan was considered as freely usable. And this is what India needs to do in this particular case. Already India has taken certain amount of steps. So what are the steps that RBI has taken in this particular case? The RBI has actually issued the rupee debt offshore, and then the masala bonds. And what it has also come up with, it has allowed the foreigners to invest in India debt onshore. So India has already taken the number of steps, but India also needs to understand that it has to make sure that it also reforms certain structural problems. So what are the structural things that India has to reform? One of the important things, or some of the important parameters that we need to understand in this case, is that any country, in case it has to internationalize its currency, it has to have the scalability. So what do we mean by scalability? Let's say for example in this particular case, what is the volume of transactions in the world? So India has to increase the volume of transactions in the world, and apart from that, what is the value of the nominal gross GDP? So when you look into the nominal gross GDP, India's rate is comparatively less. So India has to increase the scalability, that is the volume of transactions in the international market has to increase, and the India's nominal GDP has to be increased. And apart from this, we also need to be stable. stable. So what do we mean by it? As of now, Indian currency is majorly dependent on number of other currencies, for example the dollar and so on. And what we need to understand is we need to have a stable economic as well as political system. So there are three fronts that we will have to understand. One is in terms of the macroeconomic concerns. So when we understand that the macroeconomic concerns are stable, and then what we have is the financial stability that is coming from this central government, this is coming from the RBI, and then what we have is the political stability. So you need to have all these stabilities in the picture, and when we have all these stability picturing, what we would be able to establish at the global market is, because we are stable at all these fronts, we would be able to say and convince the international people that we are here to internationalize our currency. And apart from this, the international currency also looks for the liquidity aspect. So what do we mean by liquidity aspect? Can Indian currency be used to buy the products, and can Indian currency be used to sell the products? In case we are able to give the particular currency internationally freely, that is, in case we will have to buy certain quantities of assets, then we would be able to establish the credibility of Indian internationalization. So in order to make sure that India internationalizes its currency like the yuan, what we need to make sure is India matches up to all these three fronts, and that is what we need to understand in this particular case. In case we are able to meet these standards, India would be able to internationalize its currency, is what this article goes on to speak. So moving on, let's look into the next article. So the next article says Manipuri activist wins international award. So what is the important point that we are understanding? This is basically from the prelims perspective. So let's try and understand everything from the important prelims perspective. So the first point that we need to understand is reach all women in war. So what is this all about? So this is a human rights organization. So in case there is a particular question which asks about what is reach all women in war, it is one of the human rights organizations. Previously there have been questions with respect to the amnesty. Now we can expect about the reach all women in war. So kindly remember, it is a human rights organization, and this particular award that the Bina Lakshmi Nepram as well as Alice Swiss has got is in terms of the Anna Politsky Award. So who is this Anna Politsky? So this particular person marks the 12th anniversary of killing of Politsky, who was a Russian investigative reporter who uncovered the state corruption as well as right abuses, especially in Chechnya in Russia. In honor of her, because she was able to stand by the people, she could understand the grief, and in order to understand the grief of the people and stand by them, she even laid down her life. So in order to support and give voice to all those women who are standing for the rights of others, and then standing for the rights of those people who are going through a lot of grief and pain, this particular award is given to all the women. So the award is for female human rights defenders in those areas where they stand for the victims on conflict at the reason of greater personal risk. Some of the important details that we will have to understand with respect to Neparam was that she was once working for Oxfam, co-founded in 2004 the Control Arms Foundation of India, which is a civil society organization working on the disarmament as well as opposing multi-situation. 3 years later, she launched the Manipur Women Gun Survivors Network, which helped women, more than 20,000 women, deal with decades of armed conflicts as well as ethnic violence in Manipur. So basically what she did was, in her bravery, she was started speaking against the injustice, the violence as well as extremism in the regions of Manipur. And next important thing is we will also have to speak about Svetlana Elisovitz, and this was a person who won a 2015 Nobel Peace Prize for literature and for portrayal of lives of Soviet women during the Second World War, as well as impact of Chernobyl nuclear disaster and Soviet military adventure in Afghanistan. So this is basically from the prelims perspective that we are discussing about, and this is all we will have to know with respect to these articles. So moving on, let's look into some of the prelims practice questions. So what I want you guys to do in this particular case is, the minute you read this particular question, hold on for a time, pause it, answer it, and then look into a particular answer. So the first question here says, Amitav Roy Chaudhary committee recently seen in news is related to, is it FDI reforms, e-commerce, jail reforms, or Ganga rejuvenation? So kindly read the question, pause it and then answer and then look back into the answer. So the answer for this is the jail reforms. Which of the following places borders with India? So what we are discussing is with reference to Myanmar. One is the Sagyag, Chin, Rakhine. So what are the options? 1 and 2, 2 and 3, 1 and 3, and all of them. So the correct answer for this is Sangjiang and Chin. So let's look into this aspect. That is, the answer here is 1 and 2. So when we look into this map, what we will realize is that Sangjiang is closely bordering with India, Chin is closely bordering with India, but Rakhine is not bordering with India, it is bordering with Bangladesh. So the answer for this particular question is 1 and 2, that is A. So what we'll be discussing is the mains question. So the mains question says, we can easily forgive a child who is afraid of the dark. The real tragedy of life is when men are afraid of the light. Explain. So this is a ethics question that we are discussing for the day, and define the following words: fortitude, just ad bellum, as well as veracity. So kindly write all your answers on the comment section. Please do have a peer review. We will also look into your comments and then we will give you relevant feedback from our end as well. So this is it for today. Thank you so much. All the best.